Welcome to Chapter 52. We're going to be looking at ecology in this section. Ecology will also comprise the next 4 or 5 chapters, so this is just an introduction. To start with, we should know what ecology is, and it is more or less just looking at individual living things, seeing how those living things interact with their own species, seeing how those living things interact with other species, and seeing how those living things interact with the abiotic environment as well. Ecologists who are studying life will try to figure out things such as environmental factors and how those affect living things. One thing would be the geographic distribution. Some organisms could live in certain parts of the world, but they don't. Environmentalists and ecologists, they try to figure out why. And also how variations or fluctuations in food supply can affect population size. Obviously, if there's not enough food, there can't be enough a large population, or it's going to be cut off at some point. So ecologists, they try to figure out what that level is to sustain a large population size. Ecology is studied using one of 3 main methods here, and all 3 of these are used to test hypotheses. So the first would be experimentation, and experiments can be done either out in the field or in a real environment, or they can be done in an artificial setting. And the benefit to doing it in artificial settings is you can definitely control every single variable in the environment. Whereas in the field, you can't necessarily control weather patterns. So you might get an unexpected rain that could disrupt an experiment that you might be doing. Sometimes experimentations aren't the most efficient way to conduct tests, so sometimes those tests will be done on a piece of technology, such as a computer, to simulate the outcome if certain events happen to a particular population. So modeling would be using computers or other forms of technology to simulate or recreate events that could occur currently or possibly in the past. And the last way ecology could be studied is by flat-out observation. And there's 2 types. There's direct and there's indirect. And it's all based on how easily can you actually see the life. And some living things, you can just sit on your front porch and watch them happen. You can see them come and go. But other living things are very hard to find. So they actually have to be tracked because they can't be seen very easily. So we'll track living things from footprints or droppings or other marks that they might leave behind, like if they scratch on trees or anything like that, which is actually how we're tracking Bigfoot. They like to scratch on trees and bang on posts. I don't know if you knew that, but if you didn't, now you know. Ecology, studied at different levels. These are the different levels of organization in the realm of ecology. This is the most specific. This is the most inclusive. Global ecology includes the entire biosphere, which would be everything on the planet, including everything that's biotic and everything that's abiotic. Next is the landscape ecology, which focuses more or less on the interconnectedness of the different biomes on our planet. There's about 10 terrestrial biomes, and some things from one biome will be transferred into another biome. So we will see what the impact one biome has on another biome, such as, what effect does desert, what do they have on tropical rainforests? We'll come to see that shortly here. Next is the ecosystem ecology. And an ecosystem is all the populations of organisms, like the bison in this plane here, all the populations of organisms that live here, as well as their abiotic surroundings. So you'll have these bison, this grass here, there's probably going to be some snakes there, maybe some deer, maybe some top-level predators, but there's also going to be other things there. I would imagine there's a decent amount of temperature there. You can also see water in the background. and there's going to be dirt and rocks and other things like that. So how do all of those biotic and abiotic conditions affect one another in a given area? That would be looking at an ecosystem. The next one would be the community, which is looking at only the living things. It's not talking about the abiotic things. So it would be the exact same thing as the ecosystem, except remove all those abiotic features. More or less, how does life affect life? Next, we have population ecology, which is looking at how individuals in a population affect other individuals of the same population. Also, what allows for populations to grow. And then organismal ecology takes into consideration how various morphological features of organisms, such as the shark, help it survive and reproduce. So it's looking at individual anatomical features here. If you'd like to take another look at this image, it can be found on page 1145 of the textbook. I know it's a little small on the screen here, but that's where you can find it if you'd like to take a closer peek. So our first concept within this chapter is looking at climate, which is a big player in the game of life. Climate dictates a lot of life conditions in different areas of our planet, and that definitely influences the type of living things that can survive in various places. So what is climate? It is the long-term prevailing weather conditions of a given area. So this is typically looked at on an annual basis. The four things that really factor into the climate is the temperature. What is the average temperature of a place over the course of a year? How much precipitation does a place get over the course of a year? How about sunlight? And how much wind? So those are the four big things that determine the climate. Now climate, it's different yet the same in the same area. So we're going to be looking at macro and microclimate. Picture yourself living in Phoenix. That's a big, big area. We'll even say Glendale's part of Phoenix because it sort of is. Imagine that you're in, you're at the intersection of our school. You're at 51st Avenue and Union Hills. All right. And it's raining here. And if you go over to 59th Avenue and Union Hills, which is, half a mile down the road, and it's not raining there. Well, what we're seeing is an example of microclimate. It's very fine and it's localized within a very, very small window, such as right here at the school. But not far down the road, you got a different climate, not raining. If you've ever encountered that, you've seen microclimate. Macroclimate, on the other hand, is looking at the larger area as a whole, and where it might have rained at 51st Avenue but not at 59th, you might hear the forecaster on the news say, we got, half of an inch of rain today. Well, no, depends on where you're at. So it's talking about the whole area as one unit versus one part of that area. All right, so now that we looked at climate a little bit and localized versus larger scale climate, we're going to look at large scale climate, and that's global climate patterns, which is controlled very, very much by our location in space and the latitude on our planet. So our next slide gives us a little bit of, blurry understanding of this. We see right here at the equator, we have sun coming at our planet straight on. So this part of our planet receives direct sunlight. You can almost think of people or organisms at this part of our planet receiving direct sunlight almost as being an ant underneath a magnifying glass. And as we move upward or downward from the equator, that sunlight gets less and less concentrated and starts to get spread a bit more over more and more surface. And as we move down here by the curvature of the Earth's surface, we can see that that light is being spread out a bit more, and up here it's being spread out a bit more. But right underneath here, that sunlight is very, very concentrated. So right here we're seeing how latitude, which is the vertical location we happen to be on our planet affects climate. But we're also going to check out how our planet experiences climate throughout the year. Well, here we go. Throughout the year, we have our different seasons and our rotation around the sun throughout those seasons. And we can see as we move throughout the year, the location of sun, it changes. For example, over here in December, the area near the North Pole is going to be dark all year round, and we can see that because the Earth is tilted away from the sun at that point. Our Earth lays on an axis of about 23.5 degrees, which means that our planet is not straight up and down. We can see that it's diagonal at 23.5 degrees. So the North Pole is actually angled away from the sun at this point. But over here, it's angled toward the sun, which is why, Alaska, for example, will receive sunlight year-round because it's getting all this sun, and you can even see up over here at these very high latitudes, even on the dark side, it's still a little bit sunlight. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Proposal, but it's where a couple happens to be in Alaska, and they go to bed at 11 o'clock at night, and it's quite bright outside, and they have these dark, thick curtains to block the sunlight out because at nighttime it's still light. So at these extreme latitudes, you get darkness for 24 hours a day or sunlight for 23 hours a day, and then you get stuff in between as well. Obviously, this factors into what weather's going to be like or climate's going to be like in these particular regions throughout the year. This also definitely plays a role with, seasons in a little bit more northern climates than where we're at, and getting snow throughout the year or having summer throughout the year at the various times as well. And the last thing we're going to talk about in this particular section, you might notice I skipped around very briefly here. We're going to be looking at wind and air patterns. Now, going back to this image right here, we can see that at the equator, it's getting direct sunlight. But I'd be willing to bet that you know that most tropical rainforests are right at the equator. What's interesting is that as we move away from the equator, about 30 degrees north and 30 degrees south of the equator, that's where we find deserts. Why don't we find deserts at the equator if that's where sunlight is directed the most? Well, that has to do with wind patterns. And as we can see right here at about 30 degrees north, we have hot, dry air from high up in the atmosphere kind of circle down as it bumps into one another, which happens to be right at about 30 degrees north and south latitude. And as this hot, dry air comes down, it sucks out any moisture that there might be in this area. And it takes that moisture low in altitude, carries it down south or up north, where it condenses, gets heavy, and then precipitates towards our planet, which happens to be at the equator or a little bit more north of 30 degrees north and south latitude. Once that air has lost its rain, it elevates higher into the atmosphere where it is now dry because it lost all that rain, cycles around, and as it cools, drops, picks up more of that water, really making this area here quite barren and dry and similar down in the 30 degrees south latitude. So this wind pattern exists all over our planet, and that is why we have deserts right at about 30 degrees north and south latitude because of the condensing of the air. We'll pick up with the rest of this in the next video here.